The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Welcome to it Wednesdays here. It's Hail Varsity Radio back for you in 2024. A little bit of a breather, a hiatus, a road trip for some of us to Arizona. And now we are back huddled up, ready to get all things back in the world of sports. Pleasure to have you in with Hail Varsity Radio, powered by Cornhead Lager, Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. And numbers to join us today at 489-1240 or 800-825-5865. We do this. We started this tradition before the new year, probably around November, so we do roll call. And we give you the first five in the stream. You want to watch the show, you can listen across the Hail Varsity Radio Network and always catch us on YouTube, the Hail Varsity YouTube channel. Brennan, our friend from the Black Hills, in first, followed by Matt W. Dion, part of roll call in number 3, NU Grandpa 4. And then Anonymous checks in at 5. Those are the 5. You are one of the first 5. We'll give you a roll call shout out to start the show. So we'll get into the portal. How are things looking for Nebraska at wide receiver? We'll check in. Nebraska-Indiana, big one tonight. Important stretch for Nebraska basketball. They tip off at 8 o'clock at PBA. Some thoughts from the mayor yesterday ahead of Nebraska-Indiana, so we'll gear that. College football playoff, of course, it's old Big Ten versus new Big Ten. How you feeling about that? And we'll get into some NFL as well. You can email the show, Chris at hailvarsity.com. But before we get to portal and football and culture and opt-outs and bad bowl season, except for the college football playoff semis, Elijah Herbel, you are legend. I got to hear about Arizona. There was a tweet put up, and I got to hear about this invite-only party in Scottsdale where someone's walking around with like those, you had this as a kid for baseball, where it was the igloo cooler that also had the wine box trigger on it, where you push the button and it shoots on down like a waterfall, or you tip it forward, or your buddy holds it up and you drink from it, right? Well, you were at some soiree where Elijah's sitting at some massive dinner table, probably fine mahogany, the table, tilts his head back, and here comes a shot of what? What were you drinking that night?
Well, it was an at-home hibachi dinner, which I did not know was a thing. I don't know how I got an invite.
Have you ever attended an in-home hibachi dinner? Tell us on the stream, yes or no, but this hibachi dinner sounded incredible.
Yeah, I don't know how I wormed my way into an invite.
It was the mustache.
I got invited. Sure, we'll say that. And while your food was cooking, they had this great deal where they'd come around and whether you wanted or not, pour a whole bunch of sake into your mouth.
Never had sake.
It's like a Japanese wine.
I know what it is. I've just never tried it.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any left based on the shot you took.
Yeah, no, well, they had plenty, because it wasn't just the cooler. You laid out the cooler. We'll get into the video getting posted. I'm sure a good number of you out there who follow the Hail Varsity Radio account saw that on Saturday morning.
At H Varsity Radio.
Yeah, no free shout out. That is a free shout out.
Yeah, it is. Yes, it is. But no, you posted it and then it was taken down.
Yeah, we'll get into that in just a sec. I would also like to add, though, there were also water guns, but instead of the water, it was sake being shot into people's mouth. It was a great time.
This sounds like an incredible birthday.
Mm-hmm. And a video was taken of me, which was posted on the Hail Varsity Radio Twitter account.
So somebody got your phone.
At 7:30. That's what I thought. Turns out, just in some sleep-deprived state, I got up because I did some thinking. Nobody else in the house that I was staying at was up at this time. It was 6:30 local time. I was, as far as I know, still asleep. But apparently not, because I'm the only person that has access to both this video and the Twitter handle. So apparently at some point on a Saturday morning, my half awake or half asleep brain, however you want to say it, decided it'd be a good idea to tweet this out and then go back to sleep, only to wake up 3 hours later and find this video with no caption on the Hail Varsity Radio Twitter account. In a panic, I am questioning everyone in the house who got my phone last night, who thought this was funny.
What else has been tweeted out? What else has been posted from the mansion?
I was highly concerned. Luckily, it was just that video. Maybe I'll tweet it out now that it's been a couple days. But yeah, I woke up just absolutely, I don't want to say freaking out, but I was very concerned on a Saturday morning that this video was posted on the Hail Varsity Twitter account. Luckily, it seems everyone who saw it thought it was funny. It is a funny video.
It was great. Our friend Iowa Russ screenshotted it before it went down.
It was 3 hours. He had plenty of time.
Well, let's make it a little more urgent. Here's what I think happened. I think you said, we're off Saturday morning from the weekend edition. Mm-hmm. Let me tweet out a reminder that there's no weekend edition this morning. And the wrong thing got tweeted. Fair enough?
The timing would play out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And fogged brain, sake brain, or just food coma of hibachi madness.
There's one more factor here. We flew out at 5 a.m. out of Omaha on Friday morning, and I pulled the all-nighter the night before and then pulled the all-day. So I think it was a combination of sake and sleep deprivation.
You're what, 24, 25?
24.
24. Yeah, good for you.
So yeah, not the way I wanted to start my weekend. The weekend went on to us sleeping through the Fiesta Bowl after New Year's.
So you didn't even get to the Fiesta Bowl?
We didn't even make it to the Fiesta Bowl.
That's all right. Oregon rolled.
Tickets were brutally cheap and Oregon rolled, so it didn't really hurt us. We woke up and it was kickoff. We went, oh no!
Darn.
And then we saw the remainder of the first half and went, okay.
Bowl games were just a no-show this year, with the exception of the college football playoff. Congrats to Michigan. They owned the line of scrimmage. The Michigan case study on loyalty, maybe not cheating, we'll dive into, and we'll see if there's some parallels to Nebraska and Matt Rule. But the Washington game made me sweat a little bit. For the first time in 8 years, I went down and made a wager at Warhorse.
Did you know?
And I split. I was looking good until overtime. I took Bama. I was looking good until that 75-yard. How did Michigan do that to Bama to tie things and get it to overtime? If things would have gone normally, Michigan wins in regulation 2021, and I'm fine. It was 2.5. Now, Washington took care of me, so I at least split. There's my wine / gambling update. The last time I bet was Nebraska-BYU, the infamous Hail Mary game. That worked out for me. So
Washington made you sweat too, though. My goodness.
Oh, they decided to just say, let's burn every trick play on a drive where we should be killing clock, and made it close. Texas kept going, and they got the dreaded 1 second again, and Nebraska Twitter erupted with Mac Brown in 1 second. I find that funny, even though it's still sad. So the playoff games were great. Championship game Monday is going to be intriguing and fun. But the bowl games were extremely forgettable because of, well, you had departures. You had NIL situations where guys were leaving the team. You had opt-outs, which isn't that new. But even the New Year's Day 6 games, with the exception of really Oregon with some of their star power still playing, everyone else kind of tapped out. Georgia and Oregon were the two programs that didn't seem to be that hurt. While Georgia did have some guys hold off on playing a air quote meaningless game. I guess, and look at Ohio State's situation. I wonder moving forward if you don't get some help with a different portal timetable, if you are able to clamp down, and I don't know how, on tampering, let alone departures via NIL. I wonder if you're going to be able to sustain these bowl games, because attendance is sparse. They're not as meaningful. And from a TV standpoint, ratings-wise, except for the playoff, aren't great. Now, you're going to have your fan base, i.e. a Nebraska or Alabama or Michigan or, say, Oregon, Texas. I mean, you have your Florida State, Georgia. I mean, those fan bases are going to travel. They're going to check it out. But now at least you have an expanded playoff a year from now where there's going to be 12 teams that are playing for something still. Right now you have 4, so there's that remedy. Bowl-wise, Nebraska's not been in it for a while, so that's been an issue. So whatever bowl game Nebraska gets to next year will feel good, even if it is Detroit in the Oil Change Bowl. Worst case scenario, you're still going to be excited for it because you've not had it for such a while. But there needs to be some things going on. And this Michigan case study is interesting because we got to ask the question, could a situation ever happen to Nebraska once they get back to national relevancy, presumably, where they have a Florida State situation where, all right, there won't be a situation where they're left out. You're either a playoff team or you're not out of the Big Ten. Top 4 is where you got to get to. So first you got to cross that threshold. But when I talk about the Florida State situation, having opt-outs and guys just check out before the season's typically done. You saw that in some lower-tier bowl games. You've seen that for years. Michigan's had guys do that 4 or 5 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. But it's shifted a bit. And whatever you think of Harbaugh and Michigan, a lot of that has to do with culture. Guys love playing for him. And it's a similar situation going into year 2 for Matt Rule with all the guys that had decisions to make. And we think of Ty Robinson, we think of Polar Bear, we think of some of the other players Nebraska has, Giff, of course, and Benhart. Those are the 4 main guys that had decisions to make that came back because they love what's going on. Is that going to be more the exception, or is it going to be the rule? Michigan's had a lot to play for. This is their 3rd straight playoff, so it's a little different scenario situation. There's meaning behind what they're playing for, not so much with Georgia and Florida State. It was important, yes, but you had Georgia go about it, Florida State whined and didn't really follow through, and they were, by the way, decimated with 3rd-team options that really hadn't looked like they practiced all year.
Yeah, and you talk about that culture aspect of these teams that didn't have the opt-outs. And I think that as you kind of laid out the 2 that stand out in your memory of being the teams that didn't have the opt-outs that could have, Georgia as well as, now it's slipping my memory.
Florida State.
Mm-hmm. First day back, you know how it is.
It's all right.
But you think about the dichotomy there, the culture of a school like Georgia, the culture of a school like Oregon. I mean, that's been talked about a lot, the culture that Dan Lanning's brought to Oregon. What does it result in? For a quote-unquote meaningless bowl game against a team like Liberty, Liberty might have come out fast, but you had a team full of guys that didn't opt out and were committed to that team.
They wanted 12-2.
Despite the fact that it wasn't the season that they wanted. You know that Oregon team wanted to be playing in the playoff. The same could be said for Georgia, and there's an argument that Georgia deserved to be in the playoff. What did they do? I mean, most of their players, aside from a couple guys that had some nagging injuries all season long that you understand with NFL aspirations, they don't opt out. And then come back to Florida State, 19 of their 22 starters opting out, or 18, or whatever the number was. Just the ridiculous nature there that makes you question what the Florida State culture is behind the scenes. That they'd have I don't want to say a coach that would let that happen because it's not on the coaches. Players are making independent decisions, but it's how you coach the team and how you coach the guys for the 3 to 4 years before that leads to their decision whether or not they're going to opt in for a bowl game. How much they care about their teammates, how much they care about the school they play for, how much they care about the fans. All aspects of culture that I think you can see Dan Lanning's brought to Oregon. I mean, Kirby Smart's had it at Georgia. Your Bamas, your Michigans, they've had that for a while. You'd assume that if Washington would have missed out in the playoff, most of those guys would have stuck around and played in a bowl game too, because that's the kind of culture that DeBoer has built up there. That's what the differentiating factor is right now in the teams that are finding a lot of success in bowl season and aren't opting out and are treating it seriously. It's that behind-the-scenes culture that is hard to quantify but easy to see on the field.
Well, it is, and you know, you're anxious about spring football. You're anxious about Nebraska's opportunity moving forward, but it screams very loudly about culture. And really good interview with Mitch Sherman and Nick Henrich. And invite you to read that on The Athletic. But it's painted pretty loudly in the Q&A just what this first year was like for a lot of the seniors who've been through a ton, and just what kind of impact Matt Rule, Tody White, this staff made. Anonymous checks in. Apparently, to make the finals in the college football playoff, you just need to find a coach that can consistently kick the crap out of Doane, Concordia, and Hastings College. How hard can that be? Really good story from Evan Bland. We'll talk to Evan in an hour about Kalen DeBoer. And some of the hardest broadcasts I've ever done in my life were the Sioux Falls versus Nebraska Westland games, where Nebraska Westland's a good school and a really good program. And then there's Sioux Falls, who lost a whopping 1 or 2 games, I think, during DeBoer's tenure there, where he's just smoking everybody. We'll check in with Mike Babcock. Babbers is coming up. We'll get his thoughts on the culture that is laid down by Matt Rule for Nebraska football, and if Nebraska can be one of those throwback programs moving forward if the time comes when it's opt out or play a game that may not be as high profile. Husker Hoops, we'll hear from the mayor, Fred Hoiberg. Big showdown with Indiana on the way with Hail Varsity.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Thanks for spending time. Great to be back with you. It's Hail Varsity Radio, powered by Cornhead Lager. You can find us on the Hail Varsity YouTube channel or the Hail Varsity Radio Twitter feed at HVarsity Radio. Reminder, in 2024, get buckled up, use your seatbelt. It saves lives. It prevents injuries only if properly worn. Make it click, a message from the NDOT Highway Safety Office. Mike Babcock with us, Mr. Husker Football with Hail Varsity and Hurrdat Sports at MD Babs on Twitter. Babbers, Happy New Year. As a lot of excitement with the college football playoff, Husker Hoops. And, oh, yeah, the offseason, Nebraska continues to try and sprinkle in some pieces. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Happy New Year to you guys.
Well, we'll see how 2024 navigates in the football world. But what's your take? I want to get your thoughts here on the old Big Ten versus the new Big Ten. As you have Michigan v. Washington, that's set for Monday night for the championship. Do you see any parallels at all with how Michigan's built their program and what Nebraska and Matt Rule are trying to do? I'm not talking about a guy named Connor. I'm talking about high school recruiting with a few selected portal guys.
Well, I think that the recruiting has looked pretty good right now, and that's, that Rule and his staff have been aggressive, and obviously getting Dylan Raiola was a big part of that, because there can be a ripple effect when you get somebody that high profile into your program, and other high profile recruits look at it and say, well, hey, he's going there, so that gives me pause. Maybe that's where I want to go. I want to be a part of that. And I think that's the culture that we've seen to this point. But it still has to play out. We still have to see the results on the field. I think right now most fans are believers, that this is going to go in the right direction, that that Matt Rule is building this program in a way that will be successful and will be solidly successful, not just a one and out kind of a thing. But again, we have to see the results, and that's the thing that we don't know. And with the change in the Big Ten, I don't even know how you can explain or project, I guess is the word, what's going to happen next year with this conference, because it's mind-boggling to me. Just the simple fact of 18 teams in a conference. I mean, what does that mean? And you play everybody home and home. Every 5 years, you'll be guaranteed that you'll play everybody in that conference, home and home. Is that? Do I remember that correctly?
Let's just call it like it is. There's a few teams, even though Nebraska's been in the league for 13 years, that I don't care if we ever play again. Give me the sexy matchups and be able to party on those Saturdays and win some of them. That's kind of all I care about. I'll take UCLA and USC 10 times out of 10 over the chance to go play Indiana or Rutgers.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, there are teams that you just as soon not play. But what I think about that, and you mentioned Rutgers and or UCLA and USC and Washington and Oregon, they got to go clear across the country to play Rutgers and Maryland, or, Maryland and Rutgers have to go that way, or Penn State has to go that way.
Probably on a Friday night.
Yeah. I mean, Nebraska is at least in the middle of this whole thing.
See, it worked out.
It's a little bit better situation, I think, for the Huskers. But, I don't know. I mean, is this thing going to end up? I don't know how it's going to end up, I guess. And are the playoffs eventually going to be? So we got 12 teams now. So we've got a few more significant bowl games than we had this year. And, how many of those are going to be? It seems like every bowl game I turned on, it was the Big Ten against the SEC.
That's how it always is, isn't it?
Yeah. And at least the Big Ten got a championship game with a Big Ten member and a Big Ten member to be. So I guess that's good. But you guys were talking earlier about the Florida State thing. Hey, do you think that was mindset? I thought it was kind of a two-way thing. One way was that those players were going to stick around and prove that, hey, we belonged in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. Or they looked at it and said, we didn't get in the playoffs, so what's the point of playing? I don't know that it had anything to do with the culture. I think it had to do with that decision by the committee to leave Florida State out of the playoffs. And I think the players just said, we're not good enough to be in the playoffs, so what the heck? We're not going to play in this game.
And I think the point I was making is that a team with a different culture would still understand the Rose Bowl has some significance. Going and beating Georgia has some significance. Playing for pride, if you will, despite the fact that the committee does. But I can see it both ways, and I understand why a team would react like that. I just think a team with a different culture, let's say any Nick Saban-led team, I don't think would have a wave of opt-outs.
They at least waited till today to have 11 portal opt-outs.
Yeah.
But they were in a playoff, though.
And I'm not disagreeing with you. I think that's one of the possibilities, that that they were going to stick around and prove that, that's what I was hoping. I wanted to see, let's match them up and see if they can play well against Georgia. We can find out, did they belong in that playoff or didn't they belong in that playoff? And this way, we have no idea. I mean, I don't know whether they did or not from a player's standpoint, because they opted out and they didn't play Georgia, and we don't know.
Well, Mike, from this point of opt-outs and moving to a bigger expanded college football playoff, which should have 12 games every single year, if my math is correct, do you think we're seeing the death of the greater bowl season? I'm not saying bowls go away completely, but just the bowl system the way we know it. Do you think is that going away because of this wave of opt-outs and an expanded playoff?
Well, yeah, I heard someone suggest that the bowls pay these players to play in the bowl games to keep them involved. But if you don't do something like that, I think that the bowl season, as we know it, is in jeopardy, although almost all those games are on ESPN, right? Mm-hmm. ESPN or ABC. Is there the money there to say, hey, we can pay these guys, don't opt out for the NFL? Now, the NFL thing, that's probably where the money is going to come in, because they don't want to get injured. They don't want to run the risk of doing that. And that's the biggest part of it. The NIL thing, I think you could change by just having kind of a dead period in there, or a period where you can't transfer in the transfer portal during a certain time till the bowl games are over or whatever. So that the guys that did that would still be available to play in a bowl game. What was McCord, the guy that came here, made a visit here from Ohio State, and then he goes to Syracuse and stands on the sideline during the bowl game and watches them.
And Ohio State probably would have preferred him behind center with how their game went against Missouri.
Syracuse probably would have preferred him as well.
That was awful. They got rocked. Babber's going to shift over to basketball. Big one tonight against Indiana. Couple of minutes here. Big one tonight. Nebraska's favored 5.5. But pretty important stretch. I know Purdue looms. I know there's a road trip mixed in there as well for Nebraska to Wisconsin Saturday. But the next 6 here, doable, but also pretty treacherous.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the cliche one game at a time. I think you've got to approach it that way because I think the Big Ten is very competitive. And I think that Nebraska has a chance to be right in the midst of the competition and to be successful in that competition. But by the same token, if you're looking too far beyond what you have to deal with right now, you're going to be in trouble because I don't think there's any, there aren't givens. There aren't a lot of givens on that schedule when you get into Big Ten play. And that's the thing that's the way I look at it. But this would be a good way to start, certainly, against the 10-3 Indiana team, is to get that win, and then you can look to the next one. But I really think it's that cliche one game at a time.
And Mike, I know it's one game at a time for the team, but from a media standpoint, at what point do you think we can start talking about whether or not this team is or isn't a tournament team? I'm with you. I think it's way too early. I think the whole Big Ten season ahead, so much can change. But at what point can Schmidt and I start discussing whether or not this is a tournament team?
I think you can start talking about it right now. I would talk about it because I think this team has the potential to do that. And that's what I want to see. When they play Indiana, I want to see that team have that potential. And if they win the Indiana game, it's like, well, I feel a little bit better about it. And then the next game, I feel a little bit better if they can win that game. Just be consistent, and I think this is a potential NCAA tournament team. I think they can get in. I think that's the opportunity. But again, I picked Alabama to win the football playoffs too. So there you go.
The dreaded snap that screwed up the RPO was supposed to be a swing pass, Mike, and it ended up being let's run into a brick wall and lose 2 on 4th and forever.
Yeah, so it goes. And I didn't place any bets, so I'm good.
It was a day of PTSD for Husker fans, from bad snaps from the center on the shotgun exchange to a potential swing pass. And you followed up Texas getting a second left in the game. It was just a day.
Yeah, it was a whiskey day.
Well, what if Washington would have just knelt down on that one instead of trying to run a play? There would have been 40 more seconds off the clock, and it would have been even more difficult.
Some executive at ESPN called down and said, all right, we got to give Texas one drive.
Get the card out for the kid.
That's 1 second on the clock for sure.
Again, death taxes and 1 more second for those in burnt orange. Mike,
I thought they were going to call pass interference on that play.
Oh, well, the guy didn't touch him. Didn't even have the old. He didn't have
what difference does that make?
He didn't have. His left arm was 100 yards away from the guy's shoulder pad. He goes up and knocks the ball away. Thank God. But yeah, Mike's looking.
We're talking Texas.
Mike's looking for a flag. Bevo's mad.
We're talking Texas. That's perfect.
That's so good. Babbers will check in next week. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Only Texas, right? More thoughts, some college football, some Husker hoops. Hail Varsity continues.
Hail Varsity Radio is live. Now, back to Schmitty.
Schmitty's a great guy, but he don't have a brain.
And Elijah.
You want me to speak? When I point at you, yeah.
On Hail Varsity Radio.
Thanks for spending time. Evan Bland coming up. Great stuff from Mike Babcock. Get the podcast, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play with Hail Varsity Radio. You can also rewatch the show, the Hail Varsity Radio Twitter feed at HVarsity Radio, or just get to YouTube, Hail Varsity Radio. Reminder about your friends from Dyer Law. Personal injury, if you've been hurt in a personal injury accident. You can count on Dyer Law and the team to provide you with a helping hand when you need it, no matter what you're dealing with. Call Dyer Law today at 402-393-7529 or visit dyer.law to chat with a trusted professional about your personal injury claim. That's dyer.law, 402-393-7529. Open phones here till 5 if you want to get in at 489-1240 or 800-825-5865. Babbers made a great point. What could go wrong did go wrong and made a lot of us break out into a cold sweat with Washington v. Texas. And only Bevo and Mike, parting shot. Well, yeah, but it's Texas. So you imagine the two brothers, the big guy and the little guy, and Smokey and the Bandit, somewhere with a cigar lit saying, well, we got to fix this. We got to get one more second. And Texas had a shot to the end zone.
I was thinking the old Buffalo Wild Wings commercials where somebody hits the button
buzzer
from behind the bar.
Yep.
Everyone's clearing out of Buffalo Wild Wings. We got to get 40 seconds for Texas here.
Another round. Brian checks in. It's about time you slackers got back to work.
You were itching to come back yesterday.
Man, I absolutely was. I was just kind of freaking out. I'm like, and usually by about day 2 of the vacation, the wife has ordered me to go find something to do, which is go to the gym or go to the gym, which that happened. But yeah, by about day 2 or day 3, I'm ready to get back at it. But it was pretty relaxing. Just a lot of college football, time with friends. My dear friend Garth Glissman before he headed down to Birmingham, which was great. Saw him, saw friends in Omaha. Made a few trips to Omaha, which was good. Didn't fly anywhere. Thinking about maybe February for that. But you took care of the Arizona section of the Hale Varsity fan club down there, which is cool.
On assignment, clearly.
On assignment, yes, you were. You were on assignment. So let's talk a little hoops. And Nebraska favored by 5.5 tonight. Game time decision for Rink Mast. And Indiana is one of those teams that has all the talent in the world. Are they going to hit shots? Are they going to rebound? And Nebraska has forged a 9-0 record when they win the glass. That's going to be key for the Big Red tonight. Can they match up if they don't have Rink? I like what Nebraska has with Bryce Williams and Gary. They've been playing great basketball. Huskers are in position right now. They're on the bubble by a lot of accounts. They're in the thick of that middle class of the Big Ten, right behind Northwestern. This was before Northwestern got wiped off the floor last night by Illinois. And Andy Katz has Nebraska right there from a power ranking in that top 7. So you have Indiana tonight. You go to Wisconsin Saturday. Purdue and Zach Edey come to town Tuesday. So number 1 in the country as we speak right now. You're at Iowa. You're at Rutgers. And then Danny Nee night, the 20th of January against Northwestern. So I think a fair expectation with your home games is to end your road games here. You've got a pretty even split of 3 home and 3 road. Go 4-2. Go 4-2. Now, it's easier said than done going on the road. I don't think there's a great chance against Wisconsin. I don't like the shot against Purdue. But stranger things have happened. Again, at Iowa, at Rutgers, not easy. What's on our plate right now is Nebraska and Indiana. Here is Fred Hoiberg. And some thoughts on that physicality. Cut 2 here as Nebraska tips off tonight at 8 o'clock PBA.
Yeah, they've got size across the board, and they're very, very talented. And, starting with Galloway at the 2, and then Mbako at the 3, and then, with Renault and Ware at the 4 or 5, they've got length all across at every position. Xavier Johnson sounds like there's a chance that he may go tomorrow as well. And then I think Gabe Cupps has done a terrific job running the show as a younger player with that team with Xavier out of the lineup. So, it's a team that poses a lot of challenges because of their size. Mike does a great job of running actions to play to their strengths. And, we're going to have to be on point. And, we can't turn it over. We've been getting in a bad way with, especially in the second half the other night, of turning the ball over. If you do that at this level, with the game starting tomorrow night, we're going to have a tough time winning when you have a 1-to-1 assist-to-turnover ratio. So we got to get back to taking care of the ball, protecting it. They're very good at converting if they do turn you over, and then we got to finish every possession with a rebound. And, you talk about their size, their length. They do a good job crashing across the board. And, when we've won the rebound battle, we're 9-0 this year. So we just have to go out there and continue to stress physicality and hopefully go out there and execute for 40 minutes.
Be interesting to see what kind of flow Casey gets into tonight. He's always got an opportunity to be an X factor from downtown. What's he like at the rim tonight against that front of Indiana? But I really like that we go back to the Michigan State game, right, against a team that has all sorts of athletes, is all sorts of physical, probably similar to Indiana with just the caliber of dude they have on the roster. And Nebraska made the plays and found a way, and kind of a dire situation after a tough stretch there with Minnesota, with Creighton. So there's confidence Nebraska has. I know there's always buzz, right? When you get a program and a blue blood like Indiana coming in, they've got NBA talent. They've got a former NBA coach. And can Nebraska just be gritty enough tonight? And yes, make some plays with some of the players they have in Bryce Williams and Gary. I mean, Gary has the ability to kind of do what he wants.
He can guard 1 through 4.
Yeah, and that is a feather for sure. And then Williams has hit some big shots. We've already highlighted that, but he's already done it. It's not like you're waiting on him to do it. That'll be key tonight for Nebraska. Turnovers, rebounds, those are two things that are obvious, but Nebraska played a little loose with the basketball against South Carolina State. Can they dial that back? That's going to be something to watch as the season goes on against the Big Ten.
Yeah, and something I think that stacks up well in Nebraska's favor is just the fact that Indiana doesn't have Trace Jackson Davis
Thank
anymore.
God.
There's some dangerous guys in that roster with Renault and Ware down low. Those two guys are guys you're going to have to be able to account for, but there's not a guy that can go takeover mode like Nebraska has. Nebraska has a guy in Keisei Tominaga. I said this at the beginning of the year. We haven't really seen it much this season, but he can put the team on his back whenever the team needs a bucket. And think about how big it would have been for Keisei to get a bucket or two in that game against Minnesota when things started to slip away. He wasn't able to, had his worst game as a Husker, worst game as a Husker this season, I should say. And I don't think it's a coincidence how the wheels kind of fell off because he couldn't make a shot to stem the tide. Indiana doesn't really have a guy like that, like they did in years past with Trace Jackson Davis. Could be big in a game that's trading buckets potentially down the stretch, to have a guy that you can just get the ball to and say, you know what, we have a good chance of scoring with this guy having the ball in his hand.
Well, and it just doesn't have to be Tominaga. I mean, it can be Williams. It can be Gary taking that shot or keeping the ball alive. We'll get to some of your stream comments. There's a lot of happiness in the stream about how Texas went down. Winding down hour one, it's Hail Varsity, powered by Cornhead Lager.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
One final time this hour, Evan Bland in 10 minutes. His sit down with Kalen DeBoer. Thoughts on Nebraska and their portal chase for this fall. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, Hail Varsity Radio, powered by Cornhead Lager. Reminder, it's pro time, Nebraska. The Omaha Supernovas hit the court for the first ever Pro Volleyball Federation match. That comes up January 24th against the Atlanta Vibe. It's at CHI. First serve at 7. Secure your season and single match tickets now at supernovas.com. Witness world-class talent as the Omaha Supernovas host the Atlanta Vibe for the first match. Pro Volleyball Federation. The Supernovas roster includes NCAA national champions, All-Americans, Olympians. Enjoy the volleyball movement now, sweeping across the country, and see your Major League Volleyball team, the Omaha Supernovas, supernovas.com. To the stream we go here on the Hail Varsity YouTube channel. Brandon checks in. Happiest moment was watching Texas lose like that after the painful memories watching Texas with 1 second against Nebraska in the past. And Cutter checks in and says, could you believe Nebraska ever having that kind of luck that Texas has consistently had with 1 second? We could never. You make
your own luck, though.
A little bit. There's Mr. All right on the sideline. Colin has dealt with abandonment issues because of us being gone on a little bit of a breather. Dion checks in and says, congrats and thank you to Michigan. Now we don't have to listen to mouthy SEC fans. And, the questions out there in the stratosphere about Michigan, if they get it done, if it's tainted or not. We can tackle that a little bit more on Monday's preview show. But I link this back to Matt Rule's blueprint and idea with how he's built or wants to build Nebraska, with how Jim Harbaugh built Michigan. Take the Connor Stallions situation out of it. I mean, Harbaugh's taken over in 2015. It didn't have bad years, but think about what he went through. And I'm not playing a violin for Jim Harbaugh at all. But I know that he's the first coach really of that caliber at his alma mater to have his contract cut in half. Now they're scrambling to give him a $125 million deal. And forget about that. Sorry, didn't mean to doubt you. Sorry we kind of went along with suspensions twice this year. But, man, Jim, we'd love you back. Meanwhile, his recruiting classes shifted a bit. They were top 5 to top 8 his first couple of years there, and it was kind of a circus where he's shirtless in the living room drinking whole milk, wrestling recruits, to let's go get some dudes that want to stick and stay. The Hutchinsons of the world, yes, a 4-star, or the McCarthys of the world, or the Corums of the world. He went and got fits. He built on the offensive line, and everyone playing in their third consecutive playoff are, for the most part, recruits from 2019 through 2021, that span of recruiting classes where they were more in the teens or the 12, the tween region. And Michigan's NIL, Elijah, has shifted. One more year foundation. It is about retention of juniors or seniors to be versus acquiring talent. That's what they're spending NIL money on. Retention of guys who've done it. Hour 2, Evan Bland coming up with Hail Varsity.
The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Welcome to it. It's Hour 2. It's Hail Varsity. We're powered by Cornhead Lager. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel can find the show, the Hail Varsity YouTube channel. Watch that way. Hear us on the Hail Varsity Radio Network across the state, or the Hail Varsity Radio Twitter feed at HVarsity Radio. We welcome in Evan Bland for the first time in 2024 at Evan Bland, OWH on Twitter. Evan, how we doing? You gearing up for pretty exciting stretch here of college football finale with the championship game. Thanks for the time.
Yeah, doing great, guys. Happy New Year. I think we're all coming down from the glow of the CFP semifinals and how great those games were, and a little more portal churn here coming up, and it's a new year.
It is, and that's where we'll start. You've got 4 visitors coming this weekend and a pair of wideouts, and also a pretty talented back in Dowdell from Oregon. But, Evan, let's get your thoughts here on the kids that are going to be here this weekend and some takeaways here. I really like the kid out of Wyoming/Texas, Naor, at 6'3", 215, big body wideout.
Yeah, he's a really interesting one. Everyone kind of lists him as a Texas receiver, but he really didn't do anything there. He was hurt, tore his ACL in fall camp before the 22 season, and got back this last year, but really just played in the opener and was sort of a backup. So he's an interesting case if he's healthy. Really what we saw from him at Wyoming would be the thing that Nebraska fans would love to have in Lincoln. I mean, you still look at his career numbers. He's got more than 50 catches, and he's averaging 21 yards per catch. So that tells you pretty much all you need to know in terms of the big playability and the speed that he has on the edge. So that's something that Nebraska could certainly be looking for. Has kind of an interesting story, too. I mean, he was, I think he was a 2-star prospect out of high school, and then he was a hot portal commodity before he got hurt. So assuming he's healthy, that's a guy who's got the experience and the speed and the height that Nebraska is going to need, because as we've seen with some of their offers, Nebraska recognizes that they're going to need some more experience in that room, where you're looking at 2024 now with 9 receivers who are either freshmen or redshirt freshmen. Alex Bullock and Isaiah Garcia-Castaneda are sort of your resident vets, but they haven't really been doing what they do for a long time either. So I think Nebraska is looking for someone who's been there, done that a little bit at least, and Naor seems like one of those high upside possibilities.
It's Evan Bland with us here from the Omaha World Herald on Hail Varsity Radio. And Evan, tell me a little about Jamal Banks, the Wake Forest transfer. A name that, at least for me during the season, under the radar, but had a good season, entered his name in the portal, and there's been a lot of top schools that have been hot on his heels. So where does Nebraska stand in that recruitment, if you will, and what do you make of Banks, the football player?
Kind of similar to Naor a little bit in build. I mean, he's 6'4", 205 pounds. He's the guy, of all the guys that you're looking at visiting this weekend, he's the one who has the track record in college. Like he's got more than 100 catches. He's been a contributor for a Power 5 team now for multiple seasons, so he knows what he's doing. In some ways, kind of falls into line with what Nebraska's targeted in past years with Samori Toure and Trey Palmer and Billy Kemp, kind of a one-and-done sort of guy who offers some stability at the top there. I don't know, he's not maybe quite the burner that Naor is, but I think he does. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Marcus Washington, I think, just in terms of his versatility and his ability to kind of go up and high point a ball and just kind of find a way, whether that's finding a pocket in the defense or just going up above a defensive back and bringing down a ball. So another just example of a guy who would come in and I think be a pretty clear leader in a receiver group that, again, is really talented but really young right now. And you need somebody who you can trust in those spots. And I think Banks, is someone in a traditional environment who would have graduated by now. He's got the COVID year, looking to try something somewhere else, and maybe that's at Nebraska. And I think ultimately the fact that Nebraska is bringing both Banks and Naor in for visits here this week, essentially at the same time, to me is an indication that maybe they'd be happy to take both and add some depth to the offense in that receiver group.
And Evan, here's a name that Banks reminds me of. I want to get your thoughts on it just briefly. How about Maurice Purify?
I mean, if he lived up to Maurice Purify, I mean, that would be a win for Nebraska fans. I mean, he's good in that's a good comp in the sense of the frame, sure. I mean, everyone's got to remember that 06 touchdown catch at Texas A&M. So, yeah, if he could do that, that would be great. Probably similar speed, average to slightly above average, but it's really more about the hands. It's more about the instincts. It's more about the frame.
Evan, where is Nebraska in the race for Dowdell? Is it clear-cut that Nebraska is leading the race, or is it a tight race right now for this running back?
My sense is they're in a really good spot, quite honestly. I mean, they visited Mississippi State right after they entered the portal out of Oregon. That's where he's from, is the state of Mississippi. But it doesn't sound like that they're necessarily in play for him at this point. And to my knowledge, and I've talked a little bit with his camp, they don't have any other visits set up. And this is that window, like today through Sunday is that chance for transfer prospects to check out schools. And so the fact that he'll be at Nebraska, and at least as of now, just Nebraska, it kind of says all you need to know. And as long as that visit goes well, you would think that Nebraska would be in a good spot to land him. And it makes a lot of sense for both parties. I mean, Dowdell went to Oregon as a 4-star guy and was one of their headliners in that class, but sort of got caught up in just the depth of that position. And then, of course, Nebraska, when you look ahead to 24, I mean, how healthy, how much of a return to full health will Gabe Ervin and Ramir Johnson be after some pretty serious injuries? You've got Emmett Johnson coming back. The staff's always been really high on Quentin Ives, the freshman, But you'd love to have somebody with the pedigree of Dowdell coming in, and you look at his film too. I mean, this is a guy who can run through defenders, run around defenders. He's a dynamic playmaker, and when you're talking about reviving that Nebraska offense in 2024 and giving someone like Dylan Raiola another option, I think Dowdell fits that bill. So I would imagine as long as the visit goes well this week, you got to like Nebraska's chances.
And what he strikes me as, Evan, and I think you're right in that the fact that he doesn't seem to be scheduling visits elsewhere and the fact that Nebraska doesn't seriously seem to be going after any other portal running back seems to tell the full story on Dowdell. But he just strikes me as a Big Ten running back. Big frame, athletic, might not run past any defensive backs, but that's not what his job is going to be at Nebraska. The type of guy that you can trust in there on 3 downs, and you know what? He's going to lower the shoulder and pick up an extra 1 to 2 yards where he can, similar to what you see from a lot of backs in the Big Ten.
Yeah, totally. I mean, absolutely. He's physical, and he played in, I think it was 6 games at Oregon this year and was sort of just a victim to the depth. But you look at what he did in high school, junior and senior year. I mean, he carried that team, again, in the state of Mississippi with against some pretty quality competition. He was a 4-star kid, so he's got the track record as a prospect coming out. But then, yeah, I mean, you think for Nebraska, like just the value of having a guy that you can lean on as a workhorse, that you can trust in like a 3rd and 3 type of situation to be versatile enough to maybe wait for a hole and burst through, or maybe just muscle your way ahead for a couple different yards. So I think that's been something that maybe Nebraska has been lacking, is they've had backs with certain abilities, but maybe not sort of the all-around skill set that Dowdell possesses. So, again, we'll see how the visit goes here, but you would imagine, especially with classes starting on the 22nd and this whole thing being on sort of a timeline, that barring some kind of surprise, that he is looking good to be a Husker here in the future.
Evan Bland with us here, talking Nebraska portal thoughts on Hail Varsity Radio. Evan with the Omaha World Herald, at Evan Bland OWH on Twitter. Evan, we were beating this up a little bit, and we looked at Florida State and all the opt-outs. And situationally, it was, do you stick and try and prove you got hosed by the playoff selection committee, or do you bounce out because it's a air quote meaningless bowl game, even though it's a New Year's Day 6? And Florida State was sorely lacking in any talent comp, at least from the first 2 teams of their roster. What'd you say, Elijah? 19 of the 22 starters not participating. And do you think a situation like that would ever happen to Nebraska, or could happen to Nebraska? Do you think if a team's not in the playoff, you'll see more and more of it? How do you fix it is the other question.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine what would talk radio be like if Nebraska went 13-0 and didn't make the college football playoff? Like,
meltdown.
I mean, can you imagine? I mean, it would be insane. And so, like, taking that from what the players would have experienced in that moment, like, you did everything that you could, you overcame adversity, you overcame injuries, all the rest, and you're still left out because, whatever, the SEC needs to have a team in there. But so, like, you can see it. You can see them say, all right, forget this. We're done. Like, if that's how it's going to be. So, like, I can, from a human perspective, like, I can understand that sort of reaction. But, like, Georgia, as you mentioned, was on the other side, and they probably felt pretty similarly. I mean, they were the 2-time defending champs, hadn't lost a game in multiple seasons, and they get left out. And what was their response? I mean, they came out and rolled and had a point to prove, and I think they proved it pretty emphatically. So that was such an interesting game, because I think it really showed both ends of the spectrum and how you respond to the situation like that. But yeah, I mean, moving forward, I think the 12-team playoff probably comes at the right time, in that right now you had essentially the 4 CFP teams that avoided any opt-outs, and now it's going to be twice that or 3 times that moving forward with the way the format's going to be. So I think that'll help with some of it. I think bowl games are going to have to get more creative with how they differentiate themselves, like with edible mascots and things like that. Like, I think you just have to have fun with it. And the way that NIL's going, you hear ideas out there that maybe a bowl game is a situation where you can provide compensation for players for coming out there. So you're always going to have sort of those younger players with new opportunities and trying to earn their roles into the future, so they'll be out there. But I think the opt-outs, more than anything, speak to just the changing landscape in college football, where going to a bowl game isn't the big deal that it was 20 years ago. And I think that's a byproduct of the playoff and sort of this idea that if you're not playing for the championship, if you're not in the playoff, then what's the point? Everything else sort of becomes an exhibition. So I think some of that will be mitigated by the format moving forward. But I do think it's a fluid situation, especially with NIL and the transfer portal, that college football is going to have to continue to figure out.
The old Ricky Bobby, if you're not first, you're last, right? Or at least competing for it. You had a great feature on Kalen DeBoer. Got a chance to catch up with him, and then also some of the coaches in the GPAC that got to kick off against him on Saturdays. Evan, what a story Mr. South Dakota has been for college football, and he's on the doorstep before he moves into the Big Ten.
Yeah, what a story. I mean, just his path to where he is pretty remarkable. I mean, even just looking at the championship game, I mean, you've got how his story contrasts with Jim Harbaugh, who was an NFL starter and really, was a head coach essentially right away when his playing career was done. DeBoer played at the University of Sioux Falls. He was an assistant there. He was a head coach there. And I thought it was interesting, and I hope readers found it interesting that a lot of where he found himself and figured out what to do as a head coach came on fields, not just in South Dakota, but when they played, in Seward or in Blair or in Crete or whatever. And so, he's a guy who's just eminently relatable about, he just has stories from back then, and what life is like at the NAI level when you're busing to games on the day of, and you have sack lunches, and you kind of find guys that want to play there, maybe Division II cast-offs or local guys. It was a cool, I think, just insight into where he came from, and from a Nebraska perspective too, there was a little bit of overlap. People can remember, of course, the Indiana game in 2019 when DeBoer was the offensive coordinator there, and Indiana won that game. And I think he's one of those what-if guys, too, where if Nebraska decided to move on from Scott Frost at the end of the 21 season, DeBoer was on the market. 3 weeks later, Washington hired him. So I'm not saying that he would have ended up at Nebraska, but he's one of those guys who did come available at the time when there was some instability in Lincoln. So, I think he's a guy who's easy to root for on Monday night. And now that he's coming back to the Midwest in the future years in the Big Ten, I think people maybe will follow his career with a little bit more interest too.
And Evan, the crazy stat from DeBoer at Sioux Falls, 3 total losses across 5 seasons. 2 of those occurred in the playoffs. One was in the semifinal, one was in the championship game. So only 1 regular season loss for DeBoer across 5 seasons at Sioux Falls. That is ridiculous.
All he does is win, be it at Fresno or, as a key cog in that special Indiana team, and then be able to identify a guy like Penix and get him out to Seattle. Evan, we'll spend some time next week. We'll run you down again. Thanks for your time as always, and always love chatting with you here, talking some ball.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Happy New Year.
You too. There he is. Good stuff. Read that if you haven't, from Evan Bland and his feature on Kalen DeBoer. We'll shift to PBA, and the Hall of Fame coach joins us, Jeff Smith, on the way with Hail Varsity.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back with you, Hail Varsity. We're powered by Cornhead Lager, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel. We'll talk some Husker hoops. More thoughts from you as we gear up. Big Ten showdown tonight, Nebraska-Indiana. We welcome in Jeff Smith, longtime assistant with Nebraska Basketball, Hall of Fame coach with Lincoln Southeast, and tip-off at 8. Coach Smith, Happy New Year. Thanks for a few minutes. How you doing?
Happy New Year, Chris and Elijah. Doing fantastic.
It is going to be a good one tonight. Before we get to PBA, I want to spend a moment and just sad news over the holiday break with Coach Feakin from Gretna. And I know, Coach Smith, you doing just an amazing job with high school athletics you have throughout your career. But just a word or two from you on Coach Feak, if you could, and what a win by the Gretna boys on Saturday night with that buzzer beater.
Yeah, I went up to that quarterfinal and the matchups there, and they weren't sure Gretna was going to play for part of the early morning, and then they decided to in his honor. And what an impact he made on the Gretna community and the Gretna program. We only got to play him in the summer when they were Class B, but just unbelievable disciplined teams that executed well. And I was elated to watch the buzzer beater up there and watch the kids point to the sky, and it was pretty emotional and just a special win for those kids that they did that in his honor and got that win. And his legacy will carry on. He's had a good coaching tree. He's had kids come out of there that have played college basketball. He's got some college kids playing in his program right now that'll go on and honor him. And just a tough deal, and our prayers and thoughts are with his family and the community. And J.J. Wilkins, a former Southeast and Wesleyan player, his two sons play there, and I got to talk to him a little bit. And obviously they are devastated, but they're trying to move on, and you have to accept this with life sometimes, and just keep praying for the family, and hopefully we'll see this Gretna team at state tournament.
Coach, if I remember correctly, from high school health class way back in the day, I think you dealt with a tragedy within a team of your own at some point back in time. Was that up in Washington? Is that correct?
Yeah, Eastern Washington, when I was coaching there as an assistant, a young man was killed on his way to the airport coming back from Christmas break. He was our starting point guard. It was tough. It was a tough team tragedy that, that grieving process was very difficult. And he was just an unbelievable young man. Rod McClure was his name. I recruited him out of a junior college in Arizona. And he, we were doing pretty well in our second year with him at point, and couldn't quite keep that going without him. But, boy, it's tough. As losing anybody is, that grieving process is tough to go through. But, that's where teams pull together and you rely on each other. And if you're going through that tough day, you just try to recognize it and pull guys in and talk it out a little bit and hug it out sometimes.
Jeff Smith is with us, former assistant at Nebraska, Hall of Fame coach with Lincoln Southeast Hail Varsity Radio. Coach, thanks for sharing your personal experience. Thanks for the kind words on Coach Feak and the Gretna community. Appreciate you opening yourself up to sharing that with us. To tonight, I want to get to tip-off and thoughts on Nebraska. And what do you make of this Indiana squad? I know their point guard, I think, is going to be back tonight, coming off injury. That said, we're not sure about Rink. What's your gut tell you about Rink coming back, and what do you like about Nebraska tonight?
I think they're going to do everything they can to get Rink on the floor, and we're hoping that sorry, the mailman just dropped the mail off. But we're hoping that Rink can be a part of this too, because Xavier Johnson's a very talented point guard. He's I think a 6-year guy that has led them and makes a big difference on their team. I've watched a couple games with him, a couple games without him. It also hurts their depth. With the Cups kid was a little better coming off the bench and giving some energy rather than a starter. But Xavier Johnson has a little better scoring ability than Cups, and definitely better defensive ability to push the ball and get guys shots a little better where they want them. And then Rink's rebounding is huge. 10 a game, basically 9.9 for us. And Indiana happens to be a long team. 7 foot, 6'9", 6'8", and his physicality against Khalil Ware could be, or hopefully will be a key, because that's what Morehead State to him is. They got really physical. He's a tall 7-footer that can score around the basket, but Morehead State lost a close one in Indiana, and they were very physical with him and kind of took him out of his game, and I assume Nebraska will do that same thing. And Josiah Alec will be able to do that too, but I'd rather have the two-headed monster doing that. But this is a huge matchup. It's a very, I think, even matchup. Two teams that are kind of in a similar situation right now, needing this win for net ratings. And but those two players could be key for the win for either one of them.
Coach, whenever you look at the next two games after this one, you're on the road in Madison on Saturday, and then top 5 team, top 3 team, depending on how you look at it, Purdue comes to town on Tuesday. Does that ratchet up the importance of this game, just knowing that if you lose this one, maybe starting your true Big Ten season 0-3 could be in the cards, just given the teams you have to play over the next 2?
Yeah, but we just got to take this home game. It's hard not to look ahead. Any road game in the Big Ten is going to be really difficult. I think Wisconsin's playing really good right now. We know what Purdue brings to the table with their number 1 ranking and their talent and their size. But I just would, and I know Nebraska is, in talking to Coach Lenzer, all they're talking about is Indiana, and they can't focus on, well, if we lose this, that makes a difference on how we play. It just doesn't. And so tonight is just crucial that you have to take care of business at home as much as possible. We need to go at least 500 to have a chance to get in, I think, down the stretch with these last 18 games. And this one is one that's winnable at home, and that's where you got to take care of business.
Jeff Smith with us talking Nebraska-Indiana, Hail Varsity Radio. Coach, we know Rink's importance. You outlined that, and he's been really just key from a rhythm standpoint, and I really like his blue-collar approach. That said, Bryce Williams, some key moments against Sparty. Jawan Gary looked big time, really took smart shots, got to the rim. Do you like their athleticism, their physicality tonight against Indiana?
I do. I think Jawan Gary matches up well with Indiana. The Renault kid is really talented at 6'9" and strong, and finish with his left hand really well around the basket, can shoot it a little bit. That could be just a great matchup. I think two very even players with similar skill sets. And then, Bryce, the thing I like about Bryce is his size and ability to shoot over people, and without that strong contest over with a 6'1" kid, Bryce with his size can get shots off without really contesting bothering him much. And I think he's, shot it well lately and played well lately and handled the ball probably a little more than I thought he would. So those two are definitely key of how well they're playing. I think we have an advantage with bench, though. In watching Indiana, they really don't have a lot of scoring coming off the bench, and especially shooting. They have an Anthony Walker kid that comes off the bench and a Caleb Banks. They're both 6'8", and they're pretty athletic, but they don't really shoot the ball. Whereas I think C.J. Wilcher's done a really good job coming in and providing some scoring when we need it. And then Sam Hoiberg has shot the ball really well. And so those two can always give us a lift. And as hard as Sam Hoiberg plays, he also lifts us on the defensive end quite a bit. So I go Nebraska gets the nod with the bench over Indiana. And I know in watching a broadcast, that's something that they're concerned about, is getting production from the bench.
Coach, before we get you out of here, I want to get your thoughts on something that we talked about probably a month ago. Following the losses to Creighton and Minnesota, we spent a lot of time on this show talking about the lack of Nebraska having a true point guard. Do you think that issue has been resolved at all for you over the past month, or do you think that's still a concern as we get into true Big Ten play?
I think it's still a concern. I would say it's better. I wouldn't say it's definitely not resolved, but we kind of knew that Jamarcus Lawrence was a work in progress at the point guard. We kind of said that his talent shows, but that talent doesn't always correlate to point guard effectiveness. I think they've played Boogie Coleman a little bit lately just to keep him ready when needed, because he's a little more of a true point. And then I think they're playing Sam Hoiberg at the point a little bit too, just to give some different looks and get guys experience. Because, let's be honest, our schedule hasn't been real difficult, so it's a good chance for us to get guys in some positions to improve and get some experience. But now it's time. We don't have any easy ones left at all in this conference. And so we just got to hope that Jamarcus has improved enough and understands the position a little better, that he can play with just more and more effectiveness every time he takes the floor. And then maybe Jerron Coleman can get a little more comfortable in this league, that he can provide some help off the bench, and then Sam's going to give us what Sam always gives us, which is great effort. So I think it's improved. I think it's still a work in progress. We just got to hope it's, far enough along that he can be effective. I think Jamarcus has an advantage over Cupps right now. If Cupps is the main point guard, I think, if Xavier Johnson's playing, that's going to be a challenge. We also need to really contain Galloway. He's a senior that has scored a lot for them. They kind of get him the ball when they need things to happen. Really, really good 3-level player, 6'5", kind of guard skills. He's going to be a guy we need to contain and take away his right hand.
Coach, about 45 seconds, impressions on the high school landscape as we head into the new year.
Yeah, I went and saw both tournaments. I saw the HAC tournament, just, talking Class A, and Southeast made a really good run to win that tournament over at Southwest. And I thought just played really good basketball all 3 days. I got to see them all 3 days, and beating a good Kearney team, a good Pius team in the semis and the finals. And then I went up to the Metro, and at Bell West and Central play in the finals tonight. Bell West has, I think, kind of found their stride with their guards really, really playing well up there. And Central kind of made a run here that was a little bit unexpected, but it's going to be those same cast of characters with Millard North and Central back in it, and Bell West, and then we'll just see how far along the Lincoln schools can get, because they had a little further to go.
Mm-hmm. Coach, we'll see you Friday night, all right?
Sounds good. That should be an interesting game.
Yep, Southeast, Southwest. Coach Jeff Smith, Hall of Famer with the Knights on the high school ranks, longtime assistant with the Big Red. Coach, we'll see you later this week, maybe at PBA tonight. Thanks for the time.
Sounds good. Let's go Huskers tonight.
All right, there he is, Coach Jeff Smith with us. Hail Varsity, powered by Cornhead Lager, a Jock Doc on the way with Hail Varsity.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Big thanks to Jeff Smith. Podcast always available for you with Hail Varsity. Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, the Hail Varsity YouTube channel. And can rewatch the show, Hail Varsity Radio, Twitter at HVarsity Radio. Time for a Jock Doc Wednesday, Nebraska Orthopedic Center. Dr. Brandon Seifert with us to kick off 2024. Dr. Brandon, how we doing?
I'm great, Chris. How are you guys doing?
We're doing all right. A lot of sweaty foreheads, palms. It was time to reapply the deodorant for Washington fans, the way that Texas game finished, and Bevo got a second back, and you add up all the time on the clock that could have ran off, that didn't run off. You point back to Washington's super talented running back Dylan Johnson, could not stay on his feet, has a foot injury that forced him to get carted off, Dr. Brandon. That's where I want to focus. Too early to tell if he can play Monday night against Michigan, but what the heck's going on here as you do a little math for us on this Washington tailback and the injury he suffered? I mean, he was hobbling a little bit as the game went on, but man, that final minute 30 or so, he was really a hurting unit.
Yeah, it really was. You just kind of saw him grimacing in pain and obviously taking him off on the cart. Really at this point, it's kind of all up for speculation as to where this is. I tried to go back and see if there was any kind of mention of it previously in the season. It sounds like what they were mentioning is a re-aggravation of a previous injury. So at any rate, we try to start to speculate here on where this is, what part of the foot, anatomically where this is. And so a couple of possibilities. So as I went back and reviewed that video of when the injury kind of happened during this most recent game, definitely had the look of an injury to the midfoot. We've talked before about injuries to the midfoot sprains. They have a specific injury in orthopedics called a Lisfranc injury. But essentially what happens is where that metatarsal, which is the long bone that comes off the back of your great toe, where that comes up and joins up with the midfoot, there's another bone next to that called the second metatarsal. Those kind of come together and form kind of that main keystone, capstone of the mid part of the foot, and they have a really strong ligamentous complex that holds all that together. And that would be my suspicion for him, is that he'd re-aggravate maybe a mid-foot type sprain. That's what it kind of looked like just based on the video. Obviously, it's hard to totally speculate on that and say for sure. But that's what I would lean towards. The other possibilities here would be just kind of a generic run-of-the-mill kind of ankle sprain that maybe he's been battling throughout the season. That's another possibility. And then the other kind of possibility here would be, is this a potential for kind of an outside of the foot injury? We've talked about these before, like a Jones fracture. That would be that fifth metatarsal, which would be the outside kind of long bone coming off the small toe, and at the base of that, which again can be just a frustrating, nagging injury that is really hard to get those to heal, and those sometimes require surgical intervention, especially in our young athletes. So some different scenarios there. Go ahead there, Chris.
No, I was just going to say, as many miles and carries as he's logged, and you look at Washington's running 9 wins by a touchdown or less, I mean, he's been instrumental, very important for that balance on the offense. We don't really know what's behind him, but Washington's got some good backs to choose from. He's been a difference maker, and, man, he's been one tough dude playing through this, you'd have to think, throughout the year.
Absolutely, especially you take all 3 of those injuries, and those are, difficult things to get through. If you look at those and ask the question, like, which of these is probably the most nagging, more chronic, the midfoot sprains are just really difficult to kind of get through during the season. It's easy to retweak it. That's probably where I'd lean more towards kind of what injury he has. In terms of treating those, obviously there's a variety of treatments for those. You kind of start out with kind of the low-grade sprain, which even though we're using the term low-grade, they're still annoying and can hurt quite a bit. With those, you're talking some kind of short-term immobilization, maybe a little bit of short-term limited weight bearing, and then you kind of go back and just kind of play as tolerated. You start to move up into that kind of grade 2 level. Now you start to talk about more ligamentous kind of stretching, the ligamentous trauma. Now you're looking at being kind of an extended period of non-weight bearing for perhaps 4 to 6 weeks, stretches, the whole business. And then obviously you get to that high-grade sprain where you start to have displacement of those bones in that area. Then you start talking about needing some type of surgical intervention. And so obviously at this point they're being pretty quiet about what they're planning on doing and whatever his recovery is going to be. My assumption here would be he's going to want to try to play. And so they'll probably have to make, again, a game-time decision for him. In the background of this, I'm sure he's probably getting all kinds of scans and images this week, and so he's probably in an MRI scanner maybe yesterday or today to look at this further to give them a better idea.
Dr. Brandon, whenever you look at these potential injuries, and the Linz Frank stands out to me because we've talked about that injury so many times on here. I remember Derrick Henry had an issue that kept him out for a couple of weeks. He had to come back with a specially made cleat. It kept Chet Holmgren out for an entire season. You think about that, what kind of options are there for this situation where a guy maybe wants to play in one game, whatever potential injury happens in that game, worry about down the road, I just want to play. Are there any potential options for him just to get on the field come Monday night?
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned a couple there about, the special shoe where you can basically build in a special insert into the shoe. Essentially what you want to do here is, be able to obtain something where you have a stiff-soled shoe right in the central aspect of that shoe or foot just to give them some support. And so one would be a special custom shoe, a special custom brace. Honestly, kind of the most simplistic thing to use, what we call a carbon fiber foot plate, kind of a wafer-thin plate that goes under the insole in your shoe that essentially takes all the flex out of that mid part of the foot. And that would be probably the first thing they would start with just to try to get through it. Do you start talking about doing some, more aggressive level care where you start thinking about doing like injections to the area? That's really risky in this area. If we're talking Liz Frank injury, that's not an area I think that would be a wise thing to do, but who knows, they might discuss that, but I would definitely lean away from that. That's a dangerous thing to do, I think, in the setting of a Liz Frank injury.
Dr. Brandon, is there one of these options that you've laid out that's more tolerable to fight through?
The ankle sprain piece would probably be the best. If we talk best case scenarios here, the ankle sprain piece would probably be the best case scenario for him to fight through. The other thing would be if he is battling kind of that stress fracture type issue along that fifth metatarsal, probably could battle through that reasonably well. The Liz Frank would probably be the most difficult thing to kind of fight through. Just when you think about, that's kind of the capstone of your foot, the most important part of your foot. And so trying to cut, plant, move, there's so much that transfers to that area, and that's just a hard injury to kind of manage. The one thing we didn't mention, just to, obviously some more speculation, would be, is this a turf toe issue he's dealing with? And with his mechanism the other day, watching that video, there's still a potential this might even be a turf toe type injury. But again, it's hard with us, not knowing the specifics.
Dr. Brandon, we'll see how things move for Washington and their ground game for Monday night.
Yeah, Dr. Brandon, do you have a prediction for Monday night's game before we get you out of here?
Oh, I'm pulling for Washington. Their coach is awesome. I remember watching him play for Sioux Falls back in the day when they ran the score up on Old Concordia where I went. He was amazing. They were amazing, and he was amazing. And it's interesting to read that gentleman's statistics. My goodness, I think he still has their record at their school for a 500 batting average in baseball, which is unbelievable. But he's a Midwest guy. I like to root for those guys.
And he has no spy gate attached to him, which is nice, too. Dr. Brandon Seifert with us, Nebraska Orthopedic Center at Jock Doc Wednesday. Dr. Brandon, enjoy your weekend, enjoy Monday, and we'll talk next week.
Okay, fellas, take it easy.
There he is. Good to spend time with Dr. Brandon Seifert. We'll wind down a Wednesday next on Hail Varsity.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
One final time, it's Hail Varsity, powered by Cornhead Lager. Can always email the show, chris@hailvarsity.com. And for sure, find us and watch the show, the Hail Varsity YouTube channel, Hail Varsity Radio, Twitter feed at HVarsity Radio, and the podcast, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, or those video feeds. 5.5 the number. How are you feeling tonight, Elijah? Is it that close? Does Nebraska get stung? I think you're going to need some minutes from Mast for sure. I worry about turnovers. The glass is key. Indiana's got enough talent to make it happen, but if things go sideways for Indiana, how are they in tight games? How are they against Nebraska's physicality and mentality? They're on the road. It's going to be a raucous atmosphere. Nebraska basketball fans are fired up for another crack at another high-level team. Really important stretch for Nebraska to start the new year. And quite honestly, Indiana, I don't put Nebraska in the category of KU or UConn or anybody like that, but anyone that's been worth a damn Indiana's played, they've lost or worse, gotten drilled.
Yeah, and the one you left off is Auburn. They got drilled by Auburn. They got drilled by UConn. Lost in a close one to Kansas. Everyone else they've taken care of somewhat handled. I think Michigan was a close game if I remember correctly. The question to me is just, is Rink Mast a full go tonight? He's listed as questionable right now. If he's a go, this game looks completely differently than if he isn't, in my opinion. You saw how North Dakota State North Dakota, I should say, played that in the first half, early in the second half, whenever Rink Mast wasn't on the floor. Just, hey, Josiah Alec, we're just going to put a body right underneath the hoop. See if you can beat us like Rink Mast does, and he didn't do a great job of that. I think that's a huge question to me is Rink Mast a go for tonight? Because I think if Rink Mast is a go, I think Nebraska should win this basketball game. If he isn't a go, I could see Indiana winning by 10.
That's fair. It's that
big a swing.
He is important. On 3 reporting that Dylan Raiola going to be at PBA tonight, helping out with some recruiting. You've got a number of dudes that are going to be in town as part of the portal options. That's key. We mentioned some of the offensive guys, but Elijah, you also have a linebacker in Stephon Thompson. He's out of North Carolina. Originally, it's his hometown is Charlotte, but he's a Syracuse backer that I'm sure has a little history with Mr. White.
Mm-hmm. Oh, don't forget, you also have Alexander from University of Idaho. Also
the rush end linebacker, kind of blitzer.
Different type of backer, but yes. You also have him. But it sounds like the guy that's going to be there tonight is Naor from Texas, also Wyoming. Sounds like he's going to be the guy that's in tonight. Unsure if any of the recruits are also in tonight. At what point do these guys start flying in? But it does sound like Naor and Raiola will at least be in attendance for the game tonight, which is, that pure recruiting is a little important. I like
Naor's game, his size. Good stuff from Evan Bland earlier. He joined the show. We caught up with Mike Babcock, Coach Jeff Smith with us tomorrow.
And dare I say, well, I was throwing out wild comparisons earlier. I compared the kid from Wake Forest to
Mo Purify.
Dare I say Anunwa for Naor?
That's fine. I think Nebraska fans would take them about 4 Anunwas because of how big-time Quincy was.
And I'm not saying that he's going to be that big-time or going to be that good, but I'm saying in terms of how he plays in body composition.
Sure. No, give me kind of a that hybrid flex guy that's a little more speedy than a tight end. Back tomorrow, Mitch Sherman joins us, Brandon Vogel joins us, Gary Barnett, Danny Burke. Talk to you at 4 on Hail Varsity, powered by Cornhead Lager.